Welcome back to another Hagerty DIY. I'm Kyle Smith, and today we're diving into changing motorcycle tires. And this is something that, unlike automotive tires, most people can do at home. So if you have a few of the proper tools and a couple little handy chemicals and tips, you can take an afternoon and have you on fresh shoes and out riding for the weekend. Let's dive into it. First thing you're gonna need, of course, is actual new tires, tubes, and I recommend purchasing rim strips as well. And we'll get into why that is here in a little bit. As far as tools go, you're going to need a set of tire levers, which are pretty basic. You can find these at a lot of auto parts stores or any motorcycle shop is going to have those in stock for you. There's also a couple fancier tools, which I'll show you how to use those. This one in particular is a Baja no pinch tool. Had great luck with it. We'll dive into that. And then some baby powder and a little bit of tire lubricant is going to make your life easier on both fronts. You can see why we're replacing this tire. It's got a lot of dry rotting and cracking. Despite the fact that there's plenty of tread depth, this tire is really no longer safe to be riding on. It's just literally wearing away from just storage mainly. So we'll start off here by removing the valve cap, and then I like to go ahead and remove the valve stem here. Usually takes just a little bit of pressure. And what this is going to do is let absolutely all of the air out of this tube and make it a little bit easier to work with. And back off the valve stem nut. And go ahead and take that off completely. So now we need to actually break the bead of the tire. On a rim like this, the tire inflates and sets out to the very outer edge, and we want to get it down in the deepest part of the rim to make it easier to peel off. Sometimes you're going to get lucky like this one and just be able to kind of manually press it down, especially on these older kind of dried out tires. That tends to work. If you need more leverage, what I recommend doing is to actually use a piece of wood and lever it underneath something heavy like your workbench or a toolbox and lever down onto the edge of the tire. Make sure you're not crushing the rim, only pressing on the tire, but a good length of 2x4 or something like that will push down and give you all the leverage that you need to take this off without needing a tire machine. So that's all loose. Set that back down on the table. And now we're to the point where we're going to need our tire irons or our tire spoons. The goal here is to hook into the bead of the tire and pull it up over the edge of the rim. So there's two ends to your tire iron most often, and they're going to have this kind of hooked end, and then also a general just kind of slight 45 or a slight angle bend on the other end. I like to use the spooned end for this particular process. And what you have to do is get it levered down in and try and get it to where you're only catching one side of the tire, so you're not grabbing the other bead as well. So there's that one in place. And I like to get 3 lined up because once you start to put tension on the bead of the tire and start to pull it over, it gets real hard to lever another iron in there. Get our third one in here. Let's see if we can catch it just right. There it is. And then we'll just work each iron over, holding them down so they don't spring back at me. And that'll pull that right over. So take a couple of these out. Sometimes you can get real lucky and you'll almost be able to work this over by hand. This one's not going to do that. If you have a rim that you want to protect, like a nice chrome rim or a modern forged aluminum wheel, something like that, you can wedge just a little bit of plastic from like a coolant bottle or any oil quart container. If you cut those down and make just little pieces, and that will prevent these tire irons from wearing on your actual rim. So, working our way around, we'll get this one out of the way. All right, so now you can see we've got our bead loose. I'm able to reach down inside and go ahead and pull the old tube out. Go over here and get the valve stem out. And while we are going to go ahead and replace the tube this go around, and usually I recommend doing that, if you manage to not pinch the tube as you were levering the tire off, you can reuse these if you trust it, if it's in really good shape, if you know what type of condition it's in. Oftentimes, I recommend it's just cheap insurance to not have to do it twice, to just go ahead and replace it. Tubes, especially for smaller motorcycles like this one, like $12. So rather than doing this job twice, just because this tube blew shortly after I put on a new tire, we're gonna put new tubes on it. So what we're doing here is levering the tire levers down underneath that second bead. And I'll flip this over to show you here. To pull the bead over completely off the rim. So try and get a couple back in here. And this is always a little bit tricky because you're fighting the one edge, kind of working your way around. And you have to be a little careful to not split anything. Let's see if we can get that out. And so once you get this started, you get kind of a good gap on it. Oftentimes you can just peel it off by hand. And then you have your old tire, which you're probably going to have to pay someone to dispose of. And you have your nice wheel here. And you can see the next step here is to go ahead and inspect the rim inside. And I'm very happy to see someone had a nice rim strip on this one compared to a lot of people will replace this with duct tape. And I'm here to tell you not to do that. And to show you why, I went ahead and I brought something out of my own personal parts stash. Let me grab it off the floor here. This is a rim on a project bike that I had in my garage, and this is what happens when you use duct tape as a rim strip. You end up with a bunch of corrosion and the rim will rot from the inside out. You can see here, if you look on the inside, where the spokes actually come through, everything looks like it's just fine. However, here on the inside, you can see that this is a compromised rim. There's still a lot of aluminum left, but the fact is this isn't as strong as when it left the factory or as strong as it should be. So I know it's tempting to use duct tape, but I promise you that is a bad idea. This is what your rims are going to end up looking like, and they're going to fail on you. It's not fun, it's not safe, it's not a good idea. So with that said, this rim strip is in great condition. We'll pull it off to the side and check our spokes. And look in here just to make sure everything still looks good. Nothing's obviously loose. So to start reassembly, everything is clean on the rim. We're gonna go ahead and install our new rim strip. And what I like to do is line up the valve stem hole over on the side and then kind of hold that with my finger and work my way around the edge with my other hand. And this prevents it from flying off and going halfway across the shop like a giant rubber band. And of course, if you keep that hole lined up, it makes it a lot easier to make the final small adjustments to get that lined up there. So that covers all your spoke nipples there on the inside of the rim, prevent them from puncturing your tube. And now we are ready for the tire. And to install a tire is pretty simple. It's exactly the opposite of what we did to peel the other one off in using tire spoons to lever it on. What's gonna make your life a lot easier in this process though is to use a little bit of tire lubricant. And this is the one I've had great experience with and that I keep around the shop. You can use an array of automotive chemicals that you might have around the shop, window cleaner or something like that, but those really aren't safe for the rubber of a tire, and tires really aren't something to mess around with and degrade over time. All we're gonna do is wipe a little bit of this on the bead of the tire, right around this inside edge before we go to slide it on. It'll make it a little bit easier for us. So let's grab our brush here off the side. Just dip that in, get a little bit, not a lot, a little bit goes a long way on this. And we just wipe that around the edge. You could probably use an old paintbrush or even just a little acid brush if you didn't have one of these nice brushes. And then this one doesn't particularly matter. It doesn't have a mark on the tire. With a tubeless tire, most of them have a yellow dot that is to go opposite of the valve stem, and that's to help in balancing. So with these, since it's a tube tire, and you're probably not going to be balancing a tire of this size and variety, they don't have that mark in them. If you decide to balance it out, you're probably gonna find a heavy spot and you're not gonna force balance it anyway. So it makes life a little bit easier. Get one edge kind of hooked down inside and work your way around. Sometimes you can get these rolled on by hand if you're real good. So I'm not even using levers here. And the key is to pick this side up for you. You can see that that bead is all the way down in the deepest part of the drop center of the rim. And what that does is gives you the extra space for this side to actually get levered over. So you can see I'm not even having to use spoons here and got that inside all the way on. If you have a tighter fitting tire, especially a tubeless tire for like a sport bike motorcycle, you're probably not going to be able to do that by hand. You're going to have to use spoons and lever over just ever so gently. You want to make sure as you're pulling these on to use small bites with your spoons. You don't want to stretch the tire bead too far. So what we're going to do is get our tube inside. So we've got our tube here, and this is a very heavy duty tube, very thick. They're kind of hard to deal with. And you also want to make sure that this does not glue itself to the tire in some weird way when the tire heats up the first couple times you ride it. The easiest way to do that is to lubricate it yet again. And rather than a fluid, you're just using basic baby powder. And for this, all you want to do is get a nice even coat all the way around the tube before you install it into the tire. And that's going to allow you to move around it a little bit easier, and when it inflates, it won't pinch or pull in weird ways that are going to give you a flat. So, pretty easy process to just sprinkle a little bit on whatever you're working on and wipe it around. Once you've gotten baby powder all over your work surface and the part that you're working on, now you get to shove this into the tire here. So we'll line up our valve stem. And I typically like to try and install the valve stem first because that makes my life a little bit easier than having to wrestle the entire tube around inside the tire. So I'll get a couple small chunks in. And if anyone tells you they don't like mounting up motorcycle tires, this is going to be the part they don't like. And that's simply because you have to kind of lever your hands around inside the tire to get everything lined up. And once you do, it's not so bad. But it wants to take all the skin off your knuckles in the process. We'll thread the nut to hold it in place. And we'll just leave that loose for now. And then we can finish working our way around the tire to go ahead and get the rest of the tube wedged into place. Just want to try and get this down in that center of the rim. There we go. And now comes the part that is our greatest fear. Anyone that has mounted up tires like this knows that once you start setting this bead on, you inevitably pinch the tube using your tire irons, and you put a hole in it, you mount it all up, you maybe even put it back on the bike and you inflate it, and then it doesn't hold air. And it's a really frustrating experience. So what you want to do is make sure that as you're reinstalling that second bead, that you actually do not catch that tube. So the easiest way to do that is to work opposite of the valve stem. That's where you want to start mounting things up and get that hooked over the edge and work back this way. Of course, we're going to lube this up again. And if we don't work fast enough, this will dry up, but we can always reapply. So put a little on there, back into its jug. What I'm going to do is use one of my tire irons to actually hold that bead in just a little bit as I start to get a little bit of purchase and work our way around. I want to make sure that this doesn't just immediately spring back. So you'll notice I'm being real careful to not get on the tube. Sometimes that means you're going to miss a little bit. And you can see that's where that lube is working for me. That allows that to slip down and over. So again, you're taking small bites out of this, and you can see I'm not turning the lever all the way over, because if I keep that vertical, it lowers the chance that I'm going to pinch that tube inside. And anytime it starts putting up a fight, make sure and get that tire seated down as far as you can. So we've got our last little bit here, and what I'm going to do is, if you don't wedge something in as much as you work on one side, it'll just kind of chase its way around and you'll never actually get the tire in place. So I'll take a spoon and put it over here on the side. Just any tire lever will work. And then as you work down this side, it'll keep it from peeling up the rest. And these last couple can be a little tough to get that lever up inside. That's where your patience pays off. So now you've got the tire all set in place. You want to visually inspect both sides. Just make sure there's no tube sticking out. With a tube as heavy as this one was, it's pretty unlikely. If you run a light duty tube or you're doing a smaller wheel and tire, there's a chance that a thinner tube might get caught in there. So you want to just pinch everything down and look inside. Just make sure that nothing's sticking up in the way. And our valve stem is still straight, so I'll tighten that down a little bit. And now it's time to inflate it. Again, inflate it before you put it on a bike, because if you pinch the tube or you damaged it somehow or it doesn't want to seat very well, you want to deal with it now, not put it on the bike just to take it back off. So we'll grab the air hose, put some air in this, see if we can get everything to seat up, have it ready to go back on. Not all tires have this, but there is a little, they call it kind of a cheater mark or a reference line right here inside of the actual bead of the rim. And what that does is, as you inflate the tire, that allows you to know that it is completely seated and all the way out against the rim. And that is how easy it is to mount up a tire using traditional old tire spoons. I'm going to throw this back on the bike and grab a different wheel off another project I have going in my personal garage to show you how this Baja no pinch tool makes life even easier, because there's almost zero chance of pinching a tube. Coming to our special tool, it's a pretty simple little piece here, and it's the Baja no pinch tool. And I like this because it fits a variety of bikes. You can see they sell spindles that go through where the axle hole is, so inside the wheel bearings, for 4 different sizes. This fits most modern motorcycles, and the core of it is a rack and pinion system that levers out. So you have leverage in the center, and it pushes the bead of the tire out over the rim. Since you're not levering in between the bead of the tire and the actual rim itself, there's no chance of pinching a tube. It makes life really easy. It was worth the investment in a tool I really like. And it's pretty simple. What you do is thread in the axle adapter that works for your size of wheel bearing and axle setup. And you just thread that into place, and there's a little set screw here that locks it in. Doesn't take a ton of pressure. And we still use just a little bit of lube going around the bead of this tire just to make everything slip together a little bit easier. And then the way this tool works is it has gears on the lever that you put your hand on and then teeth on the piece below it. And as you pull back on that lever, it pushes the bead out. So you can see there's actually nothing going in between the tire and the rim. So not only am I not going to scratch my rim, it's virtually impossible for me to pinch a tube. So we'll try and get it started here. There we go. And then I just work my way around, taking little bites. And you can see, even in real time, this goes pretty darn quick. But what I'm going to do is stop, take a break, because just like that smaller tire, we want to make sure and get all the way down in the drop center so that I have all the extra space that I need. Spin that back around here. Drop that last part on by hand. And it's just that simple. Didn't scratch the rim, didn't damage the tire. It's kind of an expensive tool, I'm not gonna lie to you, but that has made my life a lot easier in the garage, and it is something that I highly recommend. And that is how easy changing your own motorcycle tires can be. I encourage you to get out and try it, but right now I've got some motorcycle riding to do. You should do the same. We'll see you next time.